Hello travelers, Boardman21 here, and today we finally got the dev blog on the upcoming crafting changes for patch 0.8.4, and it's huge. A lot more changes than we originally thought was going to happen, and they're completely kind of changing the way it functions. There will no longer be instability, and you can no longer fracture an item. However, you will be limited on the number of crafts you can do. It's still based on RNG, but it should feel much better, and you're almost always guaranteed a craft on an item as long as it doesn't start out with 0 forge ability, or we'll get into that below what exactly that means. To begin with, let's talk about the positives that they want to make sure they bring forward in this new crafting system. They want to make sure that there's directed crafting. What this means is they want to make sure that you are still able to choose the affix you want and put it on the item and be able to craft that way, just like you can do now. They still want to make sure there's an element of randomness. They want to make sure that it's not like when you get an item, there's going to be this amount of set flat crafting and you're going to get this. There's still going to be a factor of RNG in your crafting. Most of the existing runes will be staying, and the glyph system, while they are not keeping the two current glyphs that we have, the stability and the guardian glyph, they are keeping a functioning mechanic of using glyphs, which will all be new ones for us in the game. So let's go ahead and get into the negatives that they want to avoid going forward. Irrelevant shards. They want to get rid of the fact that we have completely useless shards, or we have a ton of them. I'm not completely sure exactly how much of this is going to be fixed in this patch, but going forward, this is one thing they'd like to be able to avoid with the crafting system in general. They want to make a difference between magic and rare items. They want you to actually feel like there's a meaningful difference. A lot of people right now will use magic items because they have just the two affixes they want, and if you get a rare item that has two affixes that you want and two that you don't, it's very hard to remove the ones that you actually want to craft on it. So this way, most people craft on magic items right now. They're actually going to be changing how that feels, where you're going to want rare items instead of magic items. They want to change the perception of luck. Almost everyone has complained that they fracture on the very first craft that they do on a very good item they just found, and it's a horrible, horrible feeling. They want to completely get away with that, get rid of it altogether, and with this new system, when we go through it, you're going to see how that changes and how that should be gone and how it should feel much better going forward. So forging potential, this is a new thing coming to. Instead of instability, we're going to have forging potential. And basically when an item drops, it's going to have a randomly rolled amount of forging potential that can roll on it. Common items will have the least and exalted items will have the most, assuming that you can't craft on legendaries, but it's not mentioned in here. I just assume they won't have any on it. What this crafting forging potential means is that you're going to have a certain amount of crafts that you can do on it. For every craft you do, that forging potential will disappear, but the amount that disappears is random, and it's a big range. It's between 1 and 15, and I'm not sure if it's weighted anywhere in there, but I do know that you could have one, like for instance, on this pair of boots that has 18 forging potential, you could technically get 18 crafts out of it, or 19 if the final one goes from 1 to 0. And you can't fracture it in there. So if you got perfect 1 whirls, you could technically get 18 crafts on that, and you could take this tier 1 all the way up to a tier 19, which would be very potent. The odds of that happening very, very slim, however. You could also be unlucky and roll 15 twice, which means you'll only get 2 crafts. If you crafted 15 the first time, it would reduce it down to 3 forging potential. And if you rolled a 3 or more forging potential on the next craft, it would take it down to 0, but it still gives you the craft because you had potential. So you will still always end on a successful craft. You would get 2 crafts in that case on this pair of boots, which isn't very many crafts. And on the magic boots right now, if you had a tier 1, you would probably more likely get more than that, especially if you were using a glyph of the guardian. But going forward, they want to stay away from using the low items and crafting them all the way into very powerful, and instead make powerful items more powerful. It's kind of how the system is going to go. So this has several immediate advantages by using it. Clearer expectations, it softens the blow. It's not going to feel as bad when it becomes uncraftable because you will always have your last attempted craft to succeed, as I said, and it'll have positive RNG. Now this is a new glyph we have, the Glyph of Hope. Modifies the outcome of a craft, granting it a 25% chance to have no forging potential cost. So instead of having a chance in ours, you just have an increased chance, which basically offsets the instability that you have. So if you had a 75% chance to succeed, and then you used a Glyph of the Guardian, you'd have 100%. And if you had a 70, it would go to 95. they're going to use the Glyph of Hope to where every single craft you do has a chance to reduce that forging potential, but this gives you a 25% chance that it doesn't cost any. If you got really lucky with these, you could do even more crafts. You could technically just keep crafting forever if this was successful every time. Essentially, you could take a common item all the way to a tier 20 item with just this if it succeeded every time, which only has a 1 in 4 chance per craft, which means it's very unlikely that would ever happen. Crafting bases magic versus rare. So this is where they talk about that they want to make sure that there's a difference between magic and rare items, and you feel that difference when it comes to crafting and when you see them on the ground. They want to make you more excited to see a rare item than a magic item. And in the current patch, like we just discussed a couple minutes ago, it's not like that. You see a magic item with 2 affixes you want, you know that's a good crafting base. You get a rare item and it has 1 affix on it that you don't want, but 3 that you do, you either have to live with that or risk it for the biscuit by trying to remove it, and it's only a 25% chance, and then craft after that and probably break it on your first attempt. That's what they're trying to remove, and so now you're going to have more forging potential on that yellow rare item so that you can do more with it than you could with a magic item. And going down, when you see some of these new glyphs, you'll see why that's important to have more forging potential, because there's a lot of things you can do now with the crafting system. So one of the things they're also adding is a Glyph of Chaos. It modifies the outcome of a craft when upgrading an affix. It randomly changes the upgraded affix to a different one that can spawn on that item type in that prefix or suffix slot, depending on which one that you are. It will not change a prefix to a suffix. You can't get 3 suffixes this way. What's cool about this, which means instead of doing a rune of removal and trying to get that one you didn't want, you can now re-roll on that affix. And when you might upgrade it, but you have a chance to re-roll it into something else. So you'll either make the bad affix you don't want higher tier, or you'll change it into a randomly different affix. The odds of you getting the affix that you did want is probably pretty slim, as there's a lot of shards in the game, but we'll see how this one feels out. The next glyph that we have is the Glyph of the Order. It modifies the outcome of a craft when upgrading an affix. Prevents the roll of an affix within its range changing when it's upgraded. Now, this was a very, very powerful one. The reason this is powerful is, let's say that you have like a tier 3 or a tier 4 affix, and that affix is a max roll. You got tier 4 and you got the max roll in that, and you know if you go tier 5, it's probably not going to be max roll again. It could be, but it might not be. Using this glyph means that you can do it and it keeps that max roll, whatever rolling percentage that is. So if you had a roll between 15 and 18% health and you rolled the 18% and it gave you the max roll, if you were to go on the next tier up and craft with this, you would get the max roll. So if the next tier was 22% max, you would hit that. If you had the base, if you had a bad roll and you're the bare minimum, for some reason wanted to keep that, you could. You wouldn't do that. But this is one way to just, change up the pattern, have a little bit more control over your crafting, and try and keep those good rolls on the lower tiers that you had and bring them all the way up to tier 5. So as I mentioned before, the forging potential will be higher on rares than it will on magic items, than it will on commons. As you can see here, the common has 15, the magic has 20, and this rare belt has 27, and exalteds will be even higher. Exalteds will give you the most forging potential that you can get, allowing you to really work with them and try and turn that exalted item into something that you can work with that was better than it was before. Right now, we all know that if an exalted item drops and it has things on it that you don't want, or it's on a bad base, there's really nothing you can do. However, going into the next patch, you should be able to work with it a lot more, which is going to make exalted items feel much better. So then we have the ruins and glyphs. This patch, we're swapping the old 2 glyphs for 4 new ones, replacing 1 ruin and adding 2 new ruins. And we're going to discuss what those all. We have the Glyph of the Chaos, as we mentioned above. So as discussed above, the rune of removal could lead to moments of frustration when it removed the one affix that made the item exciting for you in the first place, and then you're just left with all the bad ones that you didn't want, so you just throw the item back on the ground. Of course, the Glyph of Chaos provides an alternative now, but if you do want to use the rune of removal, the edge will be taken off the disappointment. When you use a rune of removal now and remove an affix, it'll give you affixes back for the number of tier levels that affix had. So if you had a tier 4 on there, it'll give you 4 affixes back now with whatever rune is removed. It's still going to be a random removal of an affix, but at least this is a way to kind of get some extra affixes back. The rune of shaping will no longer favor moderate rolls, making it more exciting to using it and giving it the potential to create more powerful items. What this means is if you used a rune of shaping on an implicit because it had a very bad roll and you could try and bring it up to a medium roll, now it can roll from low to high, meaning you can get a max implicit roll using the rune of shaping. It's going to have a little bit more power behind it. And the Rune of Cleansing is being removed. There will be no more Rune of Cleansing. They have found that it's too powerful to have a common item at the base with a very high amount of forge because you took an exalted item and cleaned it. So since that's too powerful to do to be able to craft a common item with a high amount of forging power into a very good item, they're just removing the Rune of Cleansing. Then we have the Rune of Discovery, and this is when stuff's going to start getting exciting here. The Rune of Discovery is being added in 8.4. It costs no forging potential and adds a random tier 1 affix to all the empty affix slots on an item. So what this does is, say you had a magic item drop and it had a tier 5 affix of what you really wanted. Without adding any forging to that, you could go ahead and get 3 affixes put onto that randomly, and perhaps there are 3 that you could use. Now, it's going to be random which ones it adds, so if this will be really useful, I'm not sure yet. We'll have to play around with it, but it seems like if you could get 3 crafts on an item completely for free, it seems like that would be a good way to go. Of course, the downside, those affixes might not be ones you want. It's kind of a gambling game with this one. The next one we have is the Rune of Ascendance. The first of the 3 chase crafting items, this transforms an item into a random unique of or set of the same type. So this is huge. The Rune of Ascendance can literally give you unique items. It will not give you boss drops or things that are locked up there, but you can get anything that could randomly drop to you can be churned with a Rune of Ascendance from that item base type. So if you're really looking for, say, the Morning Frost boots, you can get a pair of boots and use this on it, and you have a chance for that or any other pair of boots. So the subtype does not matter, it's just the item type. So again, if you have a pair of boots, it doesn't matter what pair of boots it is, you have a chance to turn that into any unique pair of boots. Granted that it's not a boss like Last Steps of the Living, you wouldn't be able to get that one, but any dropped boots that you can get randomly in the world could be turned into it from any pair of that you found using that glyph or that rune. Then we have the Rune of Creation. It duplicates the item but reduces the forging potential of both the original and the copy to 0. If you're already very low on forging potential and you already have a good item, you can actually make 2 of them. So while you might be thinking right now, why would I do this? They say in 8.4 it's going to become clear why you would, and I assume this has to do with making legendary items. You're probably going to have some sort of RNG between the items that you sacrifice and what you get for a legendary, and perhaps you want to have multiple tries to try and get a good legendary. This would be one way to get 2 of the same item so that you have 2 chances to get that legendary you want. I assume that's how it's going to be interactive with this rune. And then we have the Glyph of Despair. It has a chance to seal an affix instead of upgrading it. The sealed affix is moved to its own slot. Yes, this means you can now have a 5th affix on your gear, leaving its old slot open for you to add a new affix. The sealed affix cannot be modified further, and an item can have a maximum of only 1 sealed affix. You can only have up to 5 affixes on the item. The chance to seal is higher when crafting on affixes of lower tiers. This is also higher for exalted items and items with more affixes. So what this means is you're going to be much more likely to craft or get the actual seal effect to proc if you're doing like a tier 1 or a tier 2. If you're going from tier 4 to tier 5, it's much less likely to happen. And it says it's also higher for exalted items and items with more affixes. So what that means is you have a higher chance if you already have 4 affixes on the gear, or if you have an exalted item with 4 affixes, you have a higher seal chance, but the lower the tier that you're trying to do it on would have the highest possible chance there. That is how the Glyph of Despair works, or at least my understanding of it. And here you can see where you've done it, and you have 5 affixes on this piece of gear. The crafting outcome UI. So here you can see the UI looks pretty much the same, but you can see where it says forging potential now, and it costs between 1 and 20. I said 1 to 15 earlier, but I'm not sure if that changes because earlier it did say 1 to 15, but it looks like it might cost between 1 and 20. So something with 40 forging potential might only get 2 crafts on it if you had the worst possible rules. What do you guys think of this new crafting system? To me, it looks like we're going to have a lot more options. We're going to have a lot more interesting things that we can do with it. It's going to take a little bit of practice to find the best ways to craft again and really succeed at it. Also, we're going to have to tie this into the fact that we're getting legendaries at the same time and how the two might interact. Let me know in the comments below, and as always, stay safe and have a good day.